vlog number 2. This week I'm going to be talking about Looking for Alaska by John Green. Looking for Alaska is again a problem novel similar to Judy Blume's Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret that I covered last week. With that, Miles, our main character, is going through a lot of different problems. He's falling in love for the first time, he's going to boarding school, so that's kind of why it's classified as a problem novel. Who is John Green? John Green is, I think, best known for his book, The Fault in Our Stars. He is a very well-renowned. He's been writing since about 2001. Looking for Alaska was first published in 2005. So as a short summary of Looking for Alaska by John Green, it is a coming-of-age romance story, a problem novel at the core of its being, about a teen named Miles Halter. The novel is inspired by Green's own time at Indian Springs, which is where he went to preparatory school. So John Green in this book does something that most authors don't do. He introduces a philosophical approach to the issues of the teenager's life. He has them ponder moral reasoning, life and death, the enlightenment of coming of age. So Miles, just to kind of clarify, he is our main character, he's our narrator. We see his first-person perspective of everything. And so because of that, a few things about him that you should know. He is a self-promoted lover of biographies and famous last words. He constantly quotes them in the book. That is how he makes friends with his roommate, Chip Martin, the first time they ever meet. He does express a particularly morbid first quote that Chip finds hilarious. So that ensues their, friendship coming together. Chip, in turn, teaches Miles the important lesson of life at Culver Creek. Never narc on anybody, stay loyal to your friends, and don't get caught with your vices, which pretty much means booze, cigarettes, and sex. If you do get caught, you don't narc on anybody else. And so those are the things that Miles has to sort of navigate throughout this, while also dealing with girls and grades for the first time at this prep school. So he's on his quest for his own great perhaps, and this in turn is why he has come to the school. He is looking for more. And so with that, and with the help of Alaska, who he also meets, the Colonel, which is Chip's nickname, Laura, and also a friend named Takumi, he stumbles on the moments that really the book centers around. So let's talk about parents in Looking for Alaska. Again, adults are not very present, as most YA novels will kind of show, but to give John Green credit, they're not horrible people. None of the adults present hurt, abuse, or manipulate the children in any sort of way, and we see that a lot in other YA novels, actually. It's Christmas break, and Miles says, "My dad and I were watching The Simpsons, and he said he missed me." And I said I missed them too, and I did, sort of. They're such nice people. And that's pretty much it. That sums up how Miles feels about his parents. They're just nice people. They're supportive when he needs them, but other than that, they're not in the book at all. They're not present in his day-to-day life. The two people who are actually present in most of his day-to-day life are the Eagle, who's the headmaster, as well as another teacher named Mr. Hyde. And so when Miles first meets the Eagle, who is appropriately named, and something that you find in this story is that most people do have nicknames. And so the Eagle, the first day that Miles meets him, introduces himself. "Welcome to Culver Creek, Mr. Halter. You're given a large measure of freedom here, and if you abuse it, you'll regret it. You seem like a nice young man, and I'd hate to bid you farewell." And then he stared at me in a manner that was either serious or seriously malicious. "Alaska calls that the look of doom," the Colonel told me after the Eagle left. "The next time you see that, you're busted." And so that's the first time that we meet the Eagle. Already there's a sense of, foreboding. Pretty much is the only reason he exists is to actually bust students for smoking or drinking booze. Of course, we meet Mr. Hyde, who is a teacher that at first you get a sense that nobody likes him. He says, "My name," he said, "is Dr. Hyde. I have a first name, of course, so as far as you're concerned, it's Doctor. Your parents pay a great deal of money so that you can attend school here, and I expect that you will offer them some return on their investment by reading what I tell you to read when I tell you to read it, and consistently attending this class. And when you are here, you will listen to what I say." Clearly not an easy A. "This year we'll be studying 3 religious traditions, Islam, Christianity, and Buddhism. We'll tackle 3 more traditions next year, and in my classes, I will talk most of the time, and you will listen most of the time, because you may be smart, but I've been smart longer. I'm sure some of you do not like lecture classes, but as you probably noted, I'm not as young as I used to be. I would love to spend my remaining breath chatting with you about the finer points of Islamic history, but our time together is short. I must talk and you must listen. For we are engaged here in the most important pursuit in history, the search for meaning." And this kind of goes with Miles' idea of the great perhaps, the search for meaning. I mean, this teacher specifically states that that's what he's going to learn in this class. So Miles immediately is intrigued by this. He knows what he wants when he wants it, and so that's why it baffles the reader that when it comes to Alaska Young, He has no idea what he wants. So let's talk about themes. So the first thing that I want to go over is identity, the idea of discovery. I mean, Miles' entire purpose of going to Culver Creek is to discover his great perhaps. And so with that, the moment he arrives, he's actually given a name by his roommate. He names him Pudge. And the reason why is pretty superficial, actually. Yeah, the Colonel said. And we'll call you, Pudge. Get it? 'Cause you're skinny. It's a metaphor. And the idea that the Colonel actually names Pudge is pretty significant, I think, because the entire idea of discovering who you really are, you should discover what your nickname should be. The Colonel doesn't even name himself. Alaska actually names him. So friends naming friends has a bit of loyalty to it. It has a bit of that idea of, I understand you and you understand me, and I'm going to give you this name that represents who the world sees you as. And they go with it. And so the idea that Alaska is also the only one that named herself, I think says a lot, because she is this mysterious being. So then we have the Colonel, who is named for his strategic, minute prank planning that happens throughout this book. We have Takumi, who, as far as I'm concerned, that's his real name. Although when I did do some research, I found out that his name means adroit at sea. So again, we have this idea of yet another person skillful at sea. And how does that connect quite to Alaska? The only three that have nicknames throughout this whole book is Alaska, the Colonel, and Pudge. They themselves become this kind of trifecta friend group, and they're always there for each other. So this book does a lot of before and afters. We really look at time differently in this book. There is big moments and experiences in our lives that we can really think there was life before this moment and there was life after this moment. A lot of people consider weddings and children, death, to all be part of that timeline, that continuous stream of befores and afters. And I think a big moment for Miles that isn't really talked about in the book is before he was at Culver Creek and after he was at Culver Creek. And so one of the themes that fits in with this is friendship. Friendship is a really big deal. That idea of loyalty is one of the rules that the Colonel teaches Pudge on day one. Be loyal to your friends. The Colonel explained to me that 1, this is Alaska's room. 2, she had a single because the girl who was supposed to be her roommate got kicked out at the end of last year, and that 3, whether 4 I smoked, which 5 I didn't. And so this idea that they just kind of expect Pudge to be their friend, and he accepts that. You know, Pudge never acknowledges that he does or does not have friends, but the first time he does is, but when we deal with those bastards, Pudge, I promise you, they will regret messing with one of my friends. And if the Colonel thought that calling me his friend would make me stand by him, well, he was right. But just know, Pudge romanticizes Alaska. She's not perfect. Most teenage girls aren't. But even more so, Alaska's going through some things that we only see through the eyes of Miles, Pudge. And so we miss out on a lot of details about her. Don't you know who you love, Pudge? She says on page 96. You love the girl who makes you laugh and shows you porn and drinks wine with you. You don't love the crazy, sullen bitch. And there was some truth to that, be told. And so Pudge even acknowledges the fact that, yeah, I love you, Alaska, sometimes, not all the time. And because of this, the interactions between the characters are awkward and complicated, as they should be. One of the themes throughout this book that's a little difficult for students to kind of wrap their heads around is not only the idea of depression, but also just instability. I think when we look at depression as a mental illness and we look at depression as what people have to go through, we don't realize that characters in this book are dealing with more than they're letting on, because we see the world through Miles's eyes. Characters like Alaska, who he's already romanticizing, they're dealing with things that he doesn't actually recognize at first. She even says, Pudge, what you must understand about me is that I'm a deeply unhappy person. And even John Green, after the fact, says, I didn't want to diagnose Alaska, but certainly she does live with a terrible hurt. And then Pudge kind of relates this to, I didn't know whether to trust Alaska, and I'd certainly had enough of her unpredictability. Cold one day, sweet the next, irresistibly flirty one moment, irresistibly obnoxious the next. I preferred the Colonel. At least when he was cranky, he had reason to be. He sees her as somebody who's a little bit chaotic, in the sense that how can a girl who told a joke 3 hours ago be a sobbing mess? You know, she's constantly kind of flipping out back and forth, and he doesn't know what to do with that. Alright, so last thing that I do want to talk about is spoiler, 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 spoiler. Turn this off right now if you've never read Looking for Alaska, but it's death. And what we find out is that in fact dies. And so he has to deal with this death. He has to deal with the idea of somebody he knows and loves dying. And so throughout the book, as you're reading it the first time through, there are little moments that you don't realize are hinting at this. Even Miles himself is obsessed with people's last words, those last moments before death, and he knows that. And so he's having to deal with death in reality, whereas he's always looked through the biographies of people beforehand, after the fact stories. Now he's looking at death in the present tense, and it's the first time this has ever happened for him. From the moment of the middle of the story when this death happens, Miles grows as a character. It becomes an irreversible before and after in his life, a moment that his experience will never change. And so we get that perspective and how it changes, and we see him pretty much grow up between 3 pages. Because from the moment before to the moment after, he's a different person, and he will forever be a different person because of this experience. This book is one of those impactful books that changed my life, and I think that's why I reread it. I hadn't read it since 2012. When I was in college, my friend passed away pretty suddenly, completely unexpected, in an accident, and I think in this story I really relate to Pudge in that way. I never saw experiences as moments in time where my life was a before and an after. Who Alaska is doesn't really make up who Pudge is, but the moments she had with him impacted him just as much as they might have her. And so John Green later in the to the reader letter that he writes, he says that he wanted to tell a story about young people whose lives are so transformed by an experience that they can only respond by reimagining time itself. And I think since the moment I read this book, I stopped thinking about time as being linear. I started thinking about time as before and afters. I also started thinking about the fact that it's okay to forget. And in those moments, I can't feel guilty for forgetting, which is just so interesting. There are times in this book where I feel like it's painting my entire, my junior year of college. And just the symmetry of my own life with Pudge's it's kind of terrifying, actually, as a reader. The book Looking for Alaska really makes you think about those moments and who you were before that moment and who you are for every moment after it. I will leave on this note saying there are people in our lives that we meet that change us so profoundly that we didn't know we were looking for them in the first place. Very rarely is there a book that I become so emotionally attached to that it reminds me of my experiences, and that's what this book does. So you should absolutely read it. It's fantastic.